Question 1. Comparative studies suggest that when an officer in Cincinnati, Ohio, encounters an individual exhibiting behavior that raises a question of potential criminal activity, the officer's response must be grounded in specific, observable evidence. Considering the legal and ethical obligations of law enforcement in Ohio, which of the following approaches best reflects the required standard for initiating a stop or further investigation? Option A. The officer should rely on their intuition and a general feeling that the individual might be involved in something illicit based on their appearance or the location. Option B. The officer should meticulously document all specific, articulable facts and observable behaviors that contribute to their suspicion, ensuring these facts meet the legal threshold for reasonable suspicion. Option C. The officer should proceed with a search or detention based on a vague sense of unease, without needing to articulate specific reasons. Option D. The officer should escalate the interaction by making an arrest or using force if the individual appears nervous or uncooperative, regardless of concrete evidence of a crime. The correct answer is B. The officer should meticulously document all specific, articulable facts and observable behaviors that contribute to their suspicion, ensuring these facts meet the legal threshold for reasonable suspicion. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Cincinnati Police Department (CPD) officer because it involves a potential violation of an individual's rights during a lawful stop. The officer must balance the need for public safety and effective law enforcement with the constitutional protections afforded to citizens. Misjudging the situation could lead to a wrongful arrest, a violation of civil liberties, and significant legal repercussions for both the officer and the department. The core challenge lies in discerning genuine suspicion from mere conjecture or bias. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer meticulously documenting all observable facts and behaviors that contribute to their suspicion. This approach requires the officer to articulate specific, articulable facts that lead them to believe criminal activity is afoot, such as furtive movements, the presence of contraband in plain view, or a direct link to a reported crime. This is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment's requirement for probable cause or reasonable suspicion for stops and searches, as interpreted by numerous Supreme Court decisions. The CPD's internal policies and training would also mandate such a fact-based approach to ensure lawful and ethical policing, protecting both the public and the integrity of investigations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying on generalized assumptions about individuals based on their appearance or the neighborhood they are in. This is ethically and legally flawed because it constitutes profiling, which is discriminatory and lacks the specific, articulable facts required for a lawful stop. Such an approach violates constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures and undermines community trust. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with a search or detention based solely on a gut feeling, without any concrete evidence. While intuition can be a part of an officer's experience, it cannot substitute for the legal standard of reasonable suspicion. This approach is problematic as it is subjective, unprovable, and can easily be influenced by unconscious bias, leading to unwarranted intrusions on individual liberty and potential legal challenges. A further incorrect approach is to escalate the situation by using excessive force or making an arrest without sufficient justification, simply to assert authority or because the individual appears uncooperative. This is a serious ethical and legal failure. It disregards the principles of de-escalation and the requirement for probable cause for arrest. Such actions can result in civil rights violations, criminal charges against the officer, and severe damage to the CPD's reputation. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves 1. Observing and objectively documenting all relevant facts and behaviors. 2. Analyzing these facts against the legal standards for reasonable suspicion and probable cause. 3. Consulting with supervisors or legal counsel if the situation is ambiguous. 4. Prioritizing de-escalation and lawful procedures over immediate action when justification is unclear. 5. Maintaining a commitment to unbiased policing and treating all individuals with respect. Question 2. The investigation demonstrates that Officer Miller, while processing evidence from a recent arrest in Cincinnati, Ohio, observed a discrepancy in the chain of custody documentation for a key piece of physical evidence. The documentation indicated the evidence was secured by Officer Jones, but Officer Miller distinctly recalls seeing Officer Smith handle the evidence earlier that day. This situation presents a potential compromise to the integrity of the evidence. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Immediately document the observed discrepancy and report it to his supervisor and the CPD evidence custodian. Option B. Overlook the discrepancy, assuming it was a minor clerical error that will not affect the case. Option C. Make a note in his personal logbook about the discrepancy for future reference, but take no immediate official action. Option D. Attempt to speak with Officer Smith and Officer Jones to clarify the discrepancy before reporting it. Correct answer is A. Immediately document the observed discrepancy and report it to his supervisor and the CPD evidence custodian. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a Cincinnati Police Department CPD officer, Officer Miller, is faced with a situation involving potential evidence tampering. This is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the integrity of the justice system and the public's trust in law enforcement. Officer Miller's judgment is critical in ensuring that evidence is handled according to established protocols, thereby upholding due process and preventing wrongful convictions or acquittals. The core ethical and legal imperative is to maintain the chain of custody and prevent any action that could compromise the admissibility of evidence in court. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent reporting of the observed discrepancy to the appropriate supervisory personnel and the evidence custodian. This action directly aligns with CPD's general orders and the Ohio Revised Code concerning evidence handling and preservation. Specifically, CPD General Order 501, Evidence Control, mandates that all evidence must be properly documented, secured, and accounted for throughout its life cycle. Any deviation or potential compromise must be reported immediately to prevent further contamination or loss of integrity. This approach ensures that any issues with the evidence are addressed by the proper authorities, who can then initiate a formal review or investigation, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the case and upholding legal standards. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the discrepancy, assuming it was a minor oversight. This failure violates CPD's general orders and the ethical duty to report all relevant information. It risks compromising the evidence, potentially leading to its suppression in court and undermining the prosecution's case. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to rectify the situation independently without proper authorization or documentation. This could be construed as tampering with evidence, a serious offense that violates both CPD policy and state law, and would severely damage the officer's credibility and the case's integrity. Finally, discussing the discrepancy with the involved parties without reporting it through official channels is also an unacceptable approach. This bypasses established procedures, prevents proper documentation of the issue, and could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal or manipulate the situation, thereby violating the principles of transparency and accountability central to law enforcement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and legal statutes. This involves a clear understanding of evidence handling procedures, a commitment to transparency, and a willingness to report any observed irregularities through the proper chain of command. When faced with a potential issue, the professional should ask, does this action align with CPD general orders and Ohio law regarding evidence? And does this action maintain the integrity of the investigation and the justice system? If the answer to either question is no, the professional must seek guidance or report the matter through the designated channels. Question 3. Assessment of a situation in Cincinnati, Ohio, where a police officer is attempting to conduct a lawful traffic stop, and a bystander begins recording the interaction from the sidewalk across the street. The bystander is not obstructing traffic or directly interfering with the officer's commands to the driver, but their presence and recording are causing the officer to feel increasingly uneasy and distracted. What is the most appropriate immediate response for the Cincinnati Police Department officer? Option A. Acknowledge the citizen's right to record, maintain focus on the traffic stop, and if the recording is perceived as a distraction, calmly and clearly inform the citizen of the specific behavior causing concern without ordering them to stop, unless it directly impedes lawful duties. Option B. Ignore the citizen and continue with the traffic stop. Assuming their recording poses no immediate threat or impediment, Option C. Approach the citizen directly, demand they stop recording, and confiscate their device to prevent further interference. Option D. Immediately order the citizen to cease recording, citing potential disruption to the investigation, and prepare to take enforcement action if they refuse. Correct answer is A. Acknowledge the citizen's right to record, maintain focus on the traffic stop, and if the recording is perceived as a distraction, calmly and clearly inform the citizen of the specific behavior causing concern without ordering them to stop, unless it directly impedes lawful duties. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a citizen's right to record police activity and the officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests without infringing upon constitutional rights or compromising operational effectiveness. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate recording and actions that genuinely impede lawful police duties. The best approach involves de-escalating the situation by clearly communicating the officer's intentions and the specific behavior that is causing concern, while simultaneously acknowledging the citizen's right to record. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and constitutional rights, seeking to resolve the immediate issue through communication rather than immediate enforcement action. It aligns with the principles of community policing and the understanding that public observation can enhance transparency and accountability. Specifically, this approach respects the First Amendment rights of citizens to observe and record government officials performing their duties in public spaces, as established by numerous court rulings. It also adheres to the Cincinnati Police Department's general orders regarding interactions with the public and the use of recording devices, which typically emphasize professionalism and respect for civil liberties. An incorrect approach involves immediately ordering the citizen to stop recording without a clear, articulable justification that the recording is actively interfering with a lawful police duty. This fails to acknowledge the citizen's right to record and can be perceived as an attempt to obstruct legitimate oversight, potentially leading to a complaint of misconduct or a violation of civil rights. Such an action could also escalate the situation unnecessarily, creating further tension and distrust between the police and the community. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the citizen's recording and continue with the enforcement action without any attempt at communication or assessment of the situation. While seemingly passive, this can be problematic if the recording is, in fact, creating a safety hazard or significantly impeding the officer's ability to perform their duties. It misses an opportunity to address potential issues proactively and maintain situational awareness. A further incorrect approach involves physically confronting or confiscating the recording device without a clear and present danger or probable cause. This is a severe overreach of authority and a direct violation of constitutional rights, likely resulting in significant legal repercussions for the officer and the department. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a rapid assessment of the immediate threat level, the nature of the citizen's actions, and the specific police duty being performed. Officers should consider de-escalation techniques, clear communication of expectations and boundaries, and a thorough understanding of citizens' rights to record in public. If a citizen's actions are genuinely impeding lawful duties, officers should articulate the specific interference and attempt to resolve it through verbal directives before considering any enforcement measures, always mindful of the constitutional protections in place. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates a citizen has filed a formal complaint alleging excessive force by an officer during a recent traffic stop in Cincinnati, Ohio. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the responding supervisor to take? Option A. Immediately issue a written reprimand to the officer based on the complainant's initial statement. Option B. Advise the complainant that the officer will be spoken to informally after their shift to resolve the matter. Option C. Initiate a formal investigation in accordance with Cincinnati Police Department general orders and relevant Ohio revised code provisions concerning police conduct. Option D. Inform the complainant that the investigation will be postponed until the officer's next scheduled day off. Correct answer is C. Initiate a formal investigation in accordance with Cincinnati Police Department general orders and relevant Ohio revised code provisions concerning police conduct. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between departmental efficiency and the need for thorough, unbiased investigation. The pressure to quickly resolve a complaint, especially one involving potential misconduct, can lead to shortcuts that compromise due process and fairness. Officers must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing demands, ensuring that all investigations are conducted with integrity and adherence to established protocols. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal, impartial investigation that adheres strictly to the Cincinnati Police Department's CPD general orders and the Ohio Revised Code concerning police conduct and disciplinary procedures. This approach prioritizes due process for all parties involved, ensuring that evidence is gathered systematically, witness statements are taken accurately, and a fair determination is made based on established facts and departmental policy. This aligns with the ethical imperative to uphold justice and maintain public trust, as mandated by CPD's commitment to professional standards and the legal framework governing law enforcement in Ohio. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating an immediate disciplinary action based solely on the complainant's initial statement, without conducting a thorough investigation, violates the principle of due process. This approach fails to gather all relevant facts, hear from the accused officer, or consider any exculpatory evidence, potentially leading to an unjust outcome and undermining the credibility of the CPD. It disregards the CPD's general orders that mandate a formal investigation process for all complaints of misconduct, attempting to mediate the dispute informally between the complainant and the officer, without involving a supervisor or initiating a formal complaint process, bypasses established departmental procedures. While informal resolution can be appropriate for minor misunderstandings, serious allegations of misconduct require a structured investigation to ensure accountability and adherence to legal and ethical standards. This approach risks overlooking potential policy violations or criminal behavior and fails to create a documented record of the complaint and its resolution, which is essential for departmental oversight and accountability under Ohio law. Delaying the investigation until after the officer's shift ends, based on the assumption that the officer is too busy to participate, is an unacceptable abdication of duty. Prompt investigation is crucial to preserve evidence, ensure accurate recall of events, and demonstrate the CPD's commitment to addressing complaints in a timely manner. This approach suggests a lack of prioritization for internal affairs matters, and could be interpreted as an attempt to avoid or minimize the complaint, which is contrary to the CPD's duty to investigate all allegations of misconduct thoroughly and impartially as required by its own policies and the expectations of the public it serves. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the nature of the complaint. If the complaint alleges potential misconduct or policy violation, the immediate step is to follow departmental protocol for initiating a formal investigation. This involves documenting the complaint, notifying the appropriate supervisory personnel, and ensuring that the investigation is conducted by trained personnel in accordance with CPD general orders and relevant Ohio statutes. The process should be impartial, thorough, and timely, with a focus on gathering objective evidence and providing all parties with an opportunity to be heard. Question 5. Regulatory review indicates that a Cincinnati Police Department (CPD) officer, during a lawful traffic stop on I-71 in Cincinnati, Ohio, observes a suspicious package partially visible on the passenger seat. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure the integrity of potential evidence? Option A. Leave the package on the passenger seat and complete the traffic stop before addressing it. Option B. Immediately seize the package and place it in the patrol car without further documentation. Option C. Secure the package to prevent tampering or removal, and immediately begin documenting the discovery and circumstances according to CPD policy. Option D. Take photographs of the package from a distance and then leave it in place to await a specialized unit. The correct answer is C. Secure the package to prevent tampering or removal, and immediately begin documenting the discovery and circumstances according to CPD policy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Cincinnati Police Department (CPD) officer regarding the proper handling of evidence discovered during a lawful traffic stop. The officer must balance the immediate need to secure potential evidence with the procedural requirements for its collection and documentation to maintain its admissibility in court. Failure to adhere to established protocols can jeopardize the investigation and violate the rights of the individual. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the discovered item to prevent its loss or tampering, and then meticulously documenting its discovery and the circumstances surrounding it. This approach ensures the integrity of the evidence from the moment it is found. Specifically, the officer should note the exact location, time, and conditions of the discovery, and then follow CPD's established procedures for evidence collection, which would typically involve photographing the item in situ, securing it in an appropriate evidence bag, and initiating the chain of custody documentation. This aligns with the fundamental principles of evidence law and CPD's internal regulations, designed to ensure the reliability and admissibility of evidence in legal proceedings. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately seizing the item without any initial documentation or securing the scene. This failure to document the discovery context can lead to challenges regarding how and where the item was found, potentially impacting its admissibility. It bypasses crucial steps in maintaining the integrity of the evidence. Another incorrect approach is to leave the item in place and proceed with the traffic stop without securing it, intending to return later. This creates a significant risk of the evidence being lost, tampered with, or destroyed, thereby compromising the investigation and violating the officer's duty to preserve potential evidence. A third incorrect approach is to collect the item, but fail to initiate the chain of custody documentation immediately. This omission creates gaps in the record of who handled the evidence and when, which can be exploited by the defense to question the evidence's integrity and raise doubts about its authenticity. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must employ a systematic decision-making process when encountering potential evidence. This process begins with immediate situational awareness and the preservation of the scene. Next, it involves adhering strictly to departmental policies and procedures for evidence collection and documentation. Finally, it requires maintaining an unbroken chain of custody. This structured approach ensures that all actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and contribute to the pursuit of justice. Question 6. Consider a scenario where, during a lawful traffic stop on a public street in Cincinnati, Ohio, a bystander begins recording the interaction with their smartphone from the sidewalk. The bystander is not obstructing traffic, shouting, or otherwise interfering with the officer's duties, but their presence and recording are causing the driver being stopped to appear visibly agitated. What is the most appropriate professional response for the Cincinnati Police Department officer? Option A. Ignore the bystander completely, even if their recording is contributing to the driver's agitation and potentially compromising the stop. Option B. Engage the bystander in a debate about their right to record and threaten them with arrest for interfering. Option C. Immediately order the bystander to stop recording, citing general concerns about privacy. Option D. Calmly inform the bystander of their right to record, while also clearly stating that any actions that obstruct the investigation, endanger officers or the public, or violate specific ordinances will not be tolerated, and then continue with the traffic stop. The correct answer is D. Calmly inform the bystander of their right to record, while also clearly stating that any actions that obstruct the investigation, endanger officers or the public, or violate specific ordinances will not be tolerated, and then continue with the traffic stop. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a citizen's right to record police activity and the officer's duty to maintain order and safety. The officer must balance these competing interests without infringing upon constitutional rights or escalating a potentially volatile situation. Misjudging the situation could lead to a violation of civil liberties, a complaint, or even legal repercussions for the officer and the Cincinnati Police Department, CPD. Careful judgment is required to assess the intent and impact of the recording. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalating the situation by calmly informing the individual of their rights, while also clearly articulating any specific, lawful restrictions on their behavior that are directly related to the immediate safety or operational needs of the police. This approach acknowledges the citizen's right to record, as established by precedent, while also asserting the CPD's authority to enforce laws and maintain public order. Specifically, officers are trained to understand that citizens generally have a right to record police officers in public spaces, provided they do not interfere with official duties or create a safety hazard. The officer should explain that while recording is permitted, actions that obstruct the investigation, endanger officers or the public, or violate specific ordinances, e.g., trespassing, creating a disturbance, will not be tolerated. This approach prioritizes de-escalation, respects constitutional rights, and upholds departmental policy. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the individual to stop recording without any justification related to interference or safety. This fails to acknowledge the citizen's right to record and could be construed as an unlawful restriction of First Amendment rights, leading to potential civil liability for the CPD. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual and continue with the interaction, as if the recording is not happening, even if the recording is creating a distraction or potential safety concern. Respecting the right to record, officers have a duty to assess and mitigate risks. Ignoring a situation that is demonstrably impeding their duties or creating a hazard is a failure to exercise appropriate professional judgment and could compromise the effectiveness of their law enforcement actions. A third incorrect approach is to engage in an argument with the individual about their right to record or to threaten arrest solely for the act of recording. This escalates the situation unnecessarily, demonstrates a lack of understanding of constitutional rights, and is unprofessional. It can lead to a breakdown in community relations and undermine public trust in the CPD. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a de-escalation framework that prioritizes clear communication, respect for rights, and adherence to departmental policy and legal precedent. When faced with a situation involving citizen recording, officers should first assess whether the recording is causing any actual interference with their duties or posing a safety risk. If not, the recording should be permitted. If there is interference or a safety risk, the officer should calmly and clearly articulate the specific behavior that is problematic and the legal basis for any restrictions, focusing on the conduct rather than the act of recording itself. This approach fosters transparency, builds trust, and ensures that law enforcement actions are both effective and legally sound. Question 7. Upon reviewing information suggesting a suspect in a burglary case in Cincinnati, Ohio, has concealed stolen property within their residence, what is the most legally and ethically sound course of action for a Cincinnati Police Department officer to take to secure this evidence? Option A. Prepare a detailed affidavit outlining the probable cause and seek a search warrant from a judge before entering the residence to seize the property. Option B. Confront the suspect and demand immediate consent to search the residence, implying negative consequences if consent is not given. Option C. Wait for the suspect to leave the residence and then attempt to search their person or vehicle for the stolen property. Option D. Enter the residence immediately to seize the property based on the officer's belief that the property is present and likely to be moved. The correct answer is A. Prepare a detailed affidavit outlining the probable cause and seek a search warrant from a judge before entering the residence to seize the property. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Cincinnati, Ohio, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights during an investigation. The core of the challenge lies in obtaining crucial evidence without violating the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by Ohio law and relevant federal precedents. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any investigative action taken is both effective in pursuing justice and legally sound, thereby maintaining public trust and upholding the integrity of the investigation. The best professional practice involves securing a warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the constitutional mandate that warrants shall not issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. In Ohio, as in the rest of the United States, this principle is fundamental. By presenting evidence of probable cause to a neutral magistrate, the Cincinnati Police Department, CPD, officer demonstrates a commitment to due process and ensures that the intrusion into an individual's privacy is justified and narrowly tailored. This process safeguards against arbitrary government action and is the cornerstone of lawful evidence gathering. An approach that involves entering the premises and seizing the items without a warrant, relying solely on the officer's suspicion, is professionally unacceptable. This directly violates the Fourth Amendment and Ohio's interpretation of it, as it bypasses the requirement for probable cause and judicial oversight. Such an action constitutes an unreasonable search and seizure, rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. Furthermore, it erodes public trust by demonstrating a disregard for established legal protections. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to delay the investigation indefinitely because of the perceived difficulty in obtaining a warrant. While warrants require diligent effort, abandoning a potentially crucial investigative lead due to inconvenience is not a sound professional decision. It can allow suspects to evade capture or destroy evidence, hindering the pursuit of justice. The law provides mechanisms for obtaining warrants, and officers are expected to utilize these mechanisms effectively. Finally, attempting to coerce a confession or consent to a search from the individual without proper legal grounds is also professionally unacceptable. This can involve undue pressure or misrepresentation, which would render any obtained consent involuntary and therefore invalid. It also circumvents the established legal procedures for obtaining evidence and can lead to the suppression of vital information, undermining the investigation and potentially leading to the release of a guilty party. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of the available facts to establish probable cause. If probable cause exists, the officer should then consult with supervisors, and if necessary, the prosecutor's office to prepare a warrant application. The officer must be prepared to articulate the specific facts and circumstances that support probable cause to a magistrate. If probable cause cannot be established, the officer must explore alternative, lawful investigative avenues that do not infringe upon constitutional rights. Question 8. When evaluating a situation where a citizen reports observing suspicious activity involving a vehicle parked in a residential driveway in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the citizen states they believe illegal contraband may be present, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for a responding officer? Option A. Enter the property and search the vehicle without consent or a warrant, based on the citizen's belief that contraband is present. Option B. Secure the perimeter of the property to prevent the destruction of evidence, observe the vehicle and its surroundings from a public vantage point, and then seek a warrant based on the citizen's report and any observable corroborating details. Option C. Advise the citizen that their observation is insufficient grounds for police intervention and leave the scene. Option D. Immediately approach the vehicle and question the occupants about their activities, informing them that they are suspected of illegal activity. The correct answer is B. Secure the perimeter of the property to prevent the destruction of evidence, observe the vehicle and its surroundings from a public vantage point, and then seek a warrant based on the citizen's report and any observable corroborating details. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual and the integrity of a potential investigation. A hasty or improper approach could compromise evidence, lead to legal challenges, and damage public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions are both effective and lawful. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and then seeking appropriate legal authorization before conducting a search. This approach prioritizes the preservation of evidence and respects individual liberties by ensuring that any intrusion is justified and conducted under legal oversight. Specifically in Ohio, the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Ohio courts, generally requires probable cause and a warrant for searches of private property, absent specific exceptions. This method upholds due process and the exclusionary rule, which prevents illegally obtained evidence from being used in court. Approaching the situation by immediately questioning the individual without advising them of their rights, or by entering the property without consent or a warrant, represents significant regulatory and ethical failures. Questioning an individual in a custodial setting without Miranda warnings, if they are not free to leave, violates their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. Entering private property without a warrant or a recognized exception, like exigent circumstances, infringes upon the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. These actions can lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained, disciplinary action against the officer, and civil liability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the legal and ethical parameters of the situation. This involves recognizing the rights of individuals, understanding the requirements for searches and seizures under Ohio law and the U.S. Constitution, and prioritizing the preservation of evidence. When faced with uncertainty, consulting with supervisors or legal counsel is a critical step before taking action that could have significant legal ramifications. Question 9. The analysis reveals that Officer Miller, while on patrol in Cincinnati, observes an individual engaging in behavior that appears to be a violation of CPD General Order 314 regarding public loitering. However, the individual is elderly, appears disoriented, and is simply sitting on a public bench in a well-lit area, not obstructing pedestrian traffic. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Ignore the behavior, assuming it is not a significant issue given the individual's apparent age and demeanor. Option B. Approach the individual, engage in a brief, respectful conversation to ascertain their well-being and the reason for their presence, and then determine the appropriate response based on the information gathered. Option C. Confront the individual aggressively, demanding to know why they are loitering and ordering them to move along. Option D. Immediately issue a citation for violating CPD General Order 314 based on the initial observation of loitering. The correct answer is B. Approach the individual, engage in a brief, respectful conversation to ascertain their well-being and the reason for their presence, and then determine the appropriate response based on the information gathered. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent conflict between departmental policy, public perception, and the officer's personal observations. Officer Miller is faced with a situation where a direct violation of a specific Cincinnati Police Department, CPD, general order appears to be occurring, but the context suggests a potential misunderstanding or a less severe intent than the policy strictly implies. The need for careful judgment arises from the imperative to uphold departmental standards while also ensuring fair and proportionate enforcement, avoiding unnecessary escalation, and maintaining public trust. The best professional practice in this situation involves a measured approach that prioritizes de-escalation and information gathering before immediate enforcement action. This approach involves directly engaging with the individual to understand the circumstances surrounding the observed behavior. By initiating a conversation, Officer Miller can ascertain if a violation has indeed occurred, if there are mitigating factors, or if a simple correction or warning would be more appropriate and effective than a citation or arrest. This aligns with CPD's overarching ethical duty to serve and protect the community, which includes exercising discretion judiciously and treating individuals with respect. Furthermore, this approach is consistent with the principle of proportionality in law enforcement, ensuring that the response is commensurate with the offense. An incorrect approach would be to immediately issue a citation based solely on the initial observation, without further inquiry. This fails to acknowledge the potential for nuance and misunderstanding, potentially leading to an unjustified enforcement action that could damage community relations and erode public trust. Bypasses the opportunity to de-escalate and resolve the situation through communication. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed behavior altogether, assuming it is not significant enough to warrant attention. This would constitute a failure to uphold departmental policy and a dereliction of duty, potentially setting a precedent for overlooking minor infractions and undermining the integrity of CPD's enforcement efforts. It also fails to address any potential public safety concerns, however minor. A further incorrect approach would be to confront the individual aggressively and demand compliance without attempting to understand their perspective. This can escalate the situation unnecessarily, create a hostile encounter, and lead to a negative interaction that could have been avoided through a more professional and communicative approach. It disregards the importance of building rapport and de-escalating potential conflicts. A professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a rapid assessment of the situation, considering the observed behavior against relevant CPD general orders and departmental values. This should be followed by a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation, communication, and the gathering of all necessary information before determining the most appropriate course of action, which may include a warning, citation, arrest, or no action, depending on the totality of the circumstances. Question 10. Governance review demonstrates that a Cincinnati Police Department, CPD, officer worked 45 hours in a pay period that consists of 2 7-day weeks. The officer's base hourly rate is $25.00. Based on CPD policy and Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4111, overtime is paid at 1.5 times the regular rate for all hours worked over 40 in a workweek. Assuming the officer worked 40 hours in the first week and 5 hours of overtime in the second week, what is the total overtime pay for this pay period? Option A, $250, 00. Option B, $150, 00. Option C, $125, 00. Option D, $187.50. The correct answer is D, $187.50. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Cincinnati Police Department CPD officer by requiring them to accurately calculate overtime pay based on specific departmental policies and Ohio state labor laws. The challenge lies in correctly interpreting the overtime rate, accounting for different pay periods, and ensuring compliance with wage and hour regulations to prevent underpayment or overpayment, which could lead to grievances, legal action, and damage to departmental trust. Precise mathematical application is crucial for fairness and adherence to legal obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously applying the CPD's established overtime calculation formula, which is based on Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4111, regarding minimum wage and overtime. This approach requires identifying the officer's base hourly rate, determining the number of overtime hours worked, and multiplying these by the legally mandated overtime multiplier of 1.5. The calculation should be performed for each pay period to ensure accuracy and timely payment. This method is correct because it directly adheres to both departmental policy and state law, ensuring fair compensation and legal compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply multiply the total hours worked by a standard hourly rate without accounting for the overtime premium. This fails to comply with Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4111, which mandates a higher rate for hours worked beyond a standard workweek. This approach risks underpaying officers and violating wage laws. Another incorrect approach is to use an estimated or rounded overtime rate, such as 1.25 times the base rate, without consulting the official CPD policy or Ohio Revised Code. This is a direct violation of the legal requirement for a 1.5 multiplier and demonstrates a lack of diligence in adhering to established compensation structures. A further incorrect approach is to exclude certain types of paid leave or training hours from the overtime calculation, even if they fall within the overtime threshold. This misinterpretation of what constitutes compensable hours under Ohio law can lead to incorrect overtime calculations and potential wage disputes. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this scenario by first consulting the official CPD policy manual regarding overtime pay, and then cross-referencing with Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4111. They should then break down the calculation into clear steps, determine the base hourly rate, identify all overtime hours worked within the relevant pay period, apply the 1.5 overtime multiplier, and sum the regular pay and overtime pay. Any discrepancies or ambiguities should be clarified with the appropriate departmental supervisor or payroll specialist before submitting the calculation. Question 11. Implementation of a new departmental policy regarding witness interviews in Cincinnati, Ohio, requires officers to consider the potential impact on an individual's constitutional rights. During an investigation into a recent burglary, Officer Miller encounters a person who possesses information relevant to the crime. The individual appears distressed and hesitant to speak. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take to ensure the information gathered is both useful and legally sound, adhering to Ohio's legal framework and CPD's ethical guidelines? Option A. Inform the individual of their rights, if applicable, and conduct a non-coercive interview using empathetic communication techniques to encourage voluntary cooperation. Option B. Proceed with a detailed, formal interrogation without initially assessing the individual's status or providing any advisements, focusing solely on extracting a confession. Option C. Immediately begin questioning the individual to gather as much information as possible before their memory fades, assuming they are a willing informant. Option D. Advise the individual that cooperation will be noted favorably by the prosecutor's office and that non-cooperation could lead to further scrutiny. The correct answer is A. Inform the individual of their rights, if applicable, and conduct a non-coercive interview using empathetic communication techniques to encourage voluntary cooperation. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Cincinnati, Ohio, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and maintain the integrity of an investigation. The core of the challenge lies in obtaining crucial information from a witness who may be reluctant or traumatized, while ensuring that any statements obtained are admissible in court and do not violate the witness's rights or departmental policy. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complexities of witness interviewing, constitutional protections, and departmental procedures. The best approach involves a systematic and rights-respecting interview process. This includes clearly informing the witness of their rights, particularly if there is any indication that they might be considered a suspect or if the interview is custodial in nature. In Ohio, as in the rest of the United States, the Miranda warnings are paramount in such situations. Furthermore, employing empathetic and non-coercive interviewing techniques is crucial for eliciting truthful and reliable information. This approach prioritizes both the investigative goal and the ethical treatment of the individual, ensuring that any evidence gathered is legally sound and ethically obtained, thereby upholding the credibility of the Cincinnati Police Department. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with questioning without first assessing the witness's status and providing necessary advisements. This could lead to the suppression of any statements made, as they may be deemed involuntary or obtained in violation of constitutional rights. Failing to inform a witness of their rights when they are in custody or reasonably believe they are not free to leave, and then questioning them, directly contravenes the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination and the procedural safeguards established by Miranda v. Arizona. This not only jeopardizes the investigation, but also exposes the officer and the department to legal challenges and disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal questioning without proper documentation or consideration of the witness's emotional state. While initial contact might be informal, if the situation escalates to a point where the witness's liberty is restrained or they are being questioned about a crime, formal procedures must be followed. Ignoring the potential for coercion or undue influence, especially with a potentially vulnerable witness, can render statements unreliable and inadmissible. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and an insufficient understanding of investigative best practices and legal requirements. A third incorrect approach involves pressuring the witness for information by making promises of leniency or implying negative consequences for non-cooperation. Such tactics are unethical and can lead to coerced confessions or statements that are not truthful. This violates the principle of voluntary testimony and can severely damage the credibility of the investigation and the officers involved. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a tiered assessment. First, determine the nature of the interaction, e.g., consensual encounter, investigative detention, custodial interrogation. Second, if the interaction involves a deprivation of liberty or is investigatory in nature, assess whether Miranda warnings are required. Third, employ interviewing techniques that are both effective in gathering information and respectful of the individual's rights and dignity. Finally, meticulously document all interactions and statements obtained. Question 12. To address the challenge of obtaining crucial information from a potential witness to a recent crime in Cincinnati, Ohio, without compromising the ongoing investigation or violating the witness's rights, which of the following actions would be the most appropriate initial step for a Cincinnati Police Department officer? Option A. Inform the individual that their cooperation is mandatory for the investigation and that failure to comply will result in consequences. Option B. Immediately detain the individual for questioning based on the assumption they possess relevant information. Option C. Approach the individual calmly, identify yourself as a Cincinnati Police Department officer, and politely inquire if they are willing to speak about what they may have observed. Option D. Present the individual with a series of leading questions designed to elicit specific details about the crime, implying they are already a person of interest. The correct answer is C. Approach the individual calmly, identify yourself as a Cincinnati Police Department officer, and politely inquire if they are willing to speak about what they may have observed. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Cincinnati, Ohio, balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights. The critical element here is the potential for a witness to possess information vital to an ongoing investigation, but also the risk of inadvertently compromising that investigation or violating the witness's rights if approached improperly. The professional challenge lies in eliciting cooperation without coercion, ensuring the information obtained is admissible, and upholding the principles of due process. The best approach involves a careful, rights-respecting interaction that prioritizes gathering information while respecting the witness's autonomy. This means approaching the individual in a non-coercive manner, clearly identifying oneself as a Cincinnati Police Department officer, and explaining the general nature of the inquiry without revealing sensitive investigative details that could jeopardize the case or put the witness at undue risk. Offering the witness the opportunity to provide information voluntarily, without any implication of obligation or threat, is paramount. This aligns with the principles of lawful investigation and respect for individual liberties as generally understood within Ohio law and constitutional protections. An approach that involves immediate detention or apprehension of the witness without probable cause or reasonable suspicion would be professionally unacceptable. Such an action could constitute an unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Ohio's equivalent protections, leading to the suppression of any evidence obtained and potential civil liability for the officer and the Cincinnati Police Department. Furthermore, it would undermine public trust and create an adversarial relationship with potential witnesses. Another unacceptable approach would be to mislead or deceive the witness about the purpose of the interaction or the potential consequences of their cooperation or non-cooperation. This violates ethical standards of honesty and transparency in law enforcement and could render any statements obtained inadmissible in court. It also erodes the foundation of trust necessary for effective community policing. Finally, an approach that involves pressuring the witness by implying negative repercussions if they do not cooperate, without a legal basis for such pressure, is also professionally unsound. This borders on coercion and can invalidate any statements made. It disregards the witness's right to refuse to provide information and can lead to wrongful accusations or the suppression of truthful information. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a rapid assessment of the immediate circumstances, consideration of the legal standards for interaction, e.g., consensual encounter, investigative stop, and an understanding of the ethical obligations to act with fairness and integrity. Officers should always aim to gather information through lawful and ethical means, prioritizing voluntary cooperation and respecting individual rights at all times. Question 13. Examination of the data shows that a citizen has filed a formal complaint against a Cincinnati Police Department (CPD) officer, alleging unprofessional conduct during a traffic stop. The officer who received the complaint has a history of minor disciplinary actions, and the complainant has previously filed 2 unsubstantiated complaints against other officers. What is the most appropriate initial action for the CPD supervisor to take regarding this complaint? Option A. Dismiss the complaint immediately due to the complainant's history of unsubstantiated complaints and the officer's clean record regarding this specific type of allegation. Option B. Initiate a formal investigation into the complaint, gathering all available evidence and interviewing all parties involved, treating the complaint with impartiality. Option C. Assign the complaint to the officer who is the subject of the complaint for their own internal review and report. Option D. Advise the complainant that due to their history, their complaints are unlikely to be taken seriously, and suggest they refrain from filing further complaints. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal investigation into the complaint, gathering all available evidence and interviewing all parties involved, treating the complaint with impartiality. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Cincinnati Police Department (CPD) officer due to the sensitive nature of citizen complaints and the potential for bias. The officer must balance the need for thorough investigation with the imperative to treat all individuals with fairness and respect, adhering to CPD policies and Ohio law regarding citizen interactions and complaint handling. The challenge lies in ensuring that initial impressions or personal biases do not unduly influence the investigative process, thereby compromising the integrity of the complaint and the department's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a neutral and objective initial assessment of the complaint, focusing on gathering all relevant facts without prejudgment. This approach aligns with CPD's commitment to impartial law enforcement and the principles of due process. By treating the complaint as a factual matter requiring investigation, the officer upholds the department's duty to address all allegations seriously and equitably, regardless of the complainant's or the accused officer's perceived status or prior interactions. This method ensures that the investigation proceeds based on evidence and established procedures, as mandated by CPD policy and general principles of administrative fairness in Ohio. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves dismissing the complaint outright based on a perceived lack of seriousness or a prior negative interaction with the complainant. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the established complaint resolution process, potentially violating CPD policy on handling citizen grievances and Ohio law that protects citizens' right to file complaints. Such an action can be seen as retaliatory or dismissive, eroding public trust. Another incorrect approach is to immediately side with the accused officer without conducting a thorough investigation. This demonstrates bias and a failure to uphold the principle of impartiality. CPD policy requires a fair and unbiased investigation into all complaints, and prematurely accepting one party's account without corroboration is a dereliction of duty and a violation of procedural fairness. A third incorrect approach is to delay or obstruct the investigation due to personal inconvenience or a belief that the complaint is trivial. This can lead to a breakdown in accountability and may violate CPD's internal affairs procedures and any applicable Ohio statutes governing timely complaint resolution. Such delays can prejudice the investigation by allowing evidence to degrade or witnesses' memories to fade. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and legal mandates. This involves 1. Recognizing the nature of the situation and its potential impact on public trust and individual rights. 2. Identifying the core principles governing the situation, e.g., impartiality, due process, procedural fairness. 3. Evaluating potential courses of action against these principles and relevant regulations. 4. Selecting the approach that best upholds these principles and minimizes risk of procedural or ethical violations. In this case, a neutral, fact-finding approach is paramount. Question 14. Research into the application of constitutional policing principles by the Cincinnati Police Department, CPD, suggests a scenario where an officer observes an individual loitering in a dimly lit alleyway known for occasional illicit activity, but the individual is not actively engaged in any overt criminal behavior. What is the most appropriate initial approach for the officer to take in this situation, adhering to U.S. constitutional law and CPD guidelines? Option A. Initiate a conversation by stating the individual appears suspicious and ask for their identification without any articulable facts to support that suspicion. Option B. Continue to observe the individual from a distance without any interaction, assuming no immediate threat exists. Option C. Approach the individual, identify as a Cincinnati Police Department officer, and state a general observation of unusual activity in the area as the reason for the interaction. Option D. Immediately demand to know the individual's purpose for being in the alleyway, without any prior specific observation of wrongdoing. The correct answer is C. Approach the individual, identify as a Cincinnati Police Department officer, and state a general observation of unusual activity in the area as the reason for the interaction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for timely information gathering and the imperative to respect individual rights and privacy. Officers must balance their duty to investigate potential criminal activity with the constitutional protections afforded to citizens. Misjudging the scope of permissible inquiry can lead to legal challenges, compromised investigations, and damage to public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are both effective and lawful. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves approaching the individual with a clear, non-accusatory demeanor, identifying oneself as a Cincinnati Police Department officer, and articulating a specific, articulable reason for the interaction, even if it is a general observation of unusual activity. This approach respects the individual's right to be free from unreasonable stops and seizures, as established by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and interpreted by landmark Supreme Court cases like Terry v. Ohio. By stating a lawful basis for the stop, officers lay the groundwork for a permissible investigatory stop if further reasonable suspicion develops, while initially minimizing intrusion. This aligns with CPD's commitment to constitutional policing and community engagement. Incorrect approach is analysis. Approaching the individual and immediately demanding to know their purpose for being in the area without any specific observation of wrongdoing constitutes an unlawful stop. This lacks the reasonable suspicion required by the Fourth Amendment in Terry v. Ohio, potentially leading to a violation of the individual's rights and rendering any subsequent evidence inadmissible. Initiating a conversation by stating the individual appears suspicious and asking for identification without any articulable facts to support that suspicion is also problematic. Officers can ask questions during a consensual encounter. Demanding identification without reasonable suspicion can elevate the encounter to a stop that requires justification, which is absent here. This could be perceived as harassment and erode community trust. Ignoring the individual and continuing to observe from a distance without any interaction, while seemingly passive, fails to address the potential for criminal activity if the observed behavior is indeed indicative of such. While not a direct violation of rights, it represents a missed opportunity for proactive policing and information gathering if a lawful basis for interaction existed. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to citizen encounters. First, assess the situation from a distance, observing behavior for any indicators of criminal activity or distress. If observations rise to the level of reasonable suspicion, approach the individual, identify yourself, and articulate the basis for the stop. During the interaction, maintain a professional and respectful demeanor, clearly stating the purpose of the inquiry. If the initial interaction is consensual, officers can ask questions, but the individual is free to disengage. If reasonable suspicion solidifies, officers may detain briefly to investigate. Throughout the process, officers must be mindful of constitutional limitations and departmental policy, documenting all interactions accurately. Question 15. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Cincinnati Police Department officer encountering an individual recording their actions during a lawful traffic stop on a public street in Cincinnati, Ohio, where no specific signage prohibits recording? Option A. Calmly inform the individual of any specific, legally recognized restrictions on recording in that immediate area, if applicable, and explain the reasons for those restrictions, while continuing with the lawful duties of the traffic stop. Option B. Immediately order the individual to cease all recording, citing general concerns about interference with police duties, without further explanation. Option C. Engage the individual in a debate about their right to record and the officer's authority, becoming defensive about the police action. Option D. Ignore the individual and their recording device, continuing the traffic stop without acknowledging their presence. The correct answer is A. Calmly inform the individual of any specific, legally recognized restrictions on recording in that immediate area, if applicable, and explain the reasons for those restrictions, while continuing with the lawful duties of the traffic stop. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a citizen's perceived right to record and a law enforcement officer's duty to maintain order and safety during an investigation. The officer must balance the public's right to observe and record police activity with the need to conduct an effective and secure investigation, especially when dealing with potentially sensitive information or individuals. Misjudging the situation could lead to legal challenges, damage to public trust, or compromise of the investigation. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves the officer calmly and professionally informing the individual about the specific, legally recognized restrictions on recording in that particular area, if any exist, and explaining the reasons for those restrictions. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and education while upholding departmental policy and relevant Ohio law. For instance, if the recording is occurring in a private residence where officers are executing a search warrant, or in a location where sensitive victim information is being handled, there may be specific legal grounds to limit recording. The officer should clearly articulate these grounds without being confrontational. This aligns with the Cincinnati Police Department's commitment to transparency, while ensuring operational integrity and respecting individual privacy, rights as defined by Ohio statutes and constitutional protections. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately order the individual to stop recording without providing any explanation or legal basis. This can be perceived as an arbitrary restriction of rights and may escalate the situation, leading to a complaint of misconduct or a violation of the individual's First Amendment rights, as protected under Ohio law. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual and continue the investigation as if they are not present. Not overtly confrontational, this fails to address a potential disruption or violation of policy, and could allow a situation to escalate if the individual becomes more insistent or disruptive. It also misses an opportunity to educate the public on lawful recording practices. A third incorrect approach is to engage in an argument or become defensive with the individual. This unprofessional conduct can undermine public trust in the Cincinnati Police Department and may distract from the primary investigative duties. It also fails to provide a clear, lawful resolution to the situation. Professional reasoning. Law enforcement officers in Cincinnati should approach such situations by first assessing the immediate safety and security implications. They should then consult their training and departmental policies regarding citizen recording. If there are specific legal restrictions applicable to the location or circumstances, these should be clearly and calmly communicated to the individual. The goal is to resolve the situation with minimal disruption, respecting both the public's rights and the officer's duty. If the individual persists in recording in a manner that genuinely impedes the investigation or poses a safety risk, the officer should then consider further, legally justifiable actions, always documenting their rationale. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that during a routine traffic stop in Cincinnati, Ohio, an officer observes suspicious behavior from the driver, who is suspected of recent drug activity in the area. The driver appears nervous and makes vague statements about being in a hurry. The officer believes a search of the vehicle is necessary to find evidence. The driver, when asked if the officer can search the car, says, "I guess you can do what you have to do." Which of the following actions best reflects the appropriate professional conduct for the Cincinnati police officer in this scenario, adhering to Ohio law and departmental policy? Option A. Politely inform the driver that a warrant or explicit consent is required for a full vehicle search and proceed to obtain either, or conduct the stop without a search if neither is legally obtainable. Option B. Proceed with a search of the vehicle, interpreting the driver's statement as implied consent due to their nervous demeanor and desire to resolve the stop quickly. Option C. Conduct a pat-down search of the driver and the immediate passenger area of the vehicle based on the officer's suspicion of drug activity, without further explicit consent or a warrant. Option D. Immediately search the entire vehicle, believing the driver's statement, coupled with the officer's suspicion, provides sufficient justification to bypass the need for a warrant. Correct answer is A. Politely inform the driver that a warrant or explicit consent is required for a full vehicle search and proceed to obtain either, or conduct the stop without a search if neither is legally obtainable. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that effective policing in Cincinnati requires officers to navigate complex ethical dilemmas with a strong understanding of departmental policy and the Ohio Revised Code. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits a perceived immediate need for information against established protocols designed to protect individual rights and ensure the integrity of investigations. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can lead to shortcuts that undermine due process and public trust. The best approach involves prioritizing adherence to established legal and departmental procedures. This means obtaining consent or a warrant before conducting a search, even when faced with a seemingly cooperative individual and a compelling investigative need. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and Cincinnati Police Department policy, which mandates lawful investigative techniques. By respecting these boundaries, officers uphold constitutional rights, maintain the admissibility of evidence, and foster community trust. An approach that relies on implied consent based on the individual's demeanor or a vague statement of cooperation is ethically and legally flawed. This bypasses the explicit requirement for consent or a warrant, potentially violating the individual's Fourth Amendment rights. Furthermore, accepting a statement of cooperation as blanket consent for any search is a misinterpretation of consent, which must be freely and voluntarily given for a specific scope. Another unacceptable approach is to proceed with a search based solely on the officer's suspicion or the belief that the information is crucial to the investigation. This disregards the legal standard for searches, which requires probable cause, and in most cases, a warrant. Acting on suspicion alone is a violation of constitutional protections and departmental policy, risking the suppression of evidence and disciplinary action. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a clear assessment of the legal requirements for a search, including the need for probable cause and a warrant or valid consent. Officers must be trained to recognize the nuances of consent and to clearly articulate the scope of any requested search. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or legal advisor is paramount to ensure all actions are lawful and ethically sound, thereby protecting both the integrity of the investigation and the rights of the individual. Question 17. System analysis indicates that a Cincinnati Police Department officer on patrol observes an individual standing erratically in the middle of a sidewalk in a residential neighborhood at dusk. The individual is speaking loudly to themselves, gesturing wildly, and appears disoriented. They are not blocking traffic or directly threatening anyone. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer? Option A. Initiate a high-risk stop by activating emergency lights and sirens and ordering the individual to the ground. Option B. Immediately demand the individual step aside and identify themselves, assuming they are under the influence and potentially causing a disturbance. Option C. Drive past the individual without stopping, as they are not currently posing a direct threat to traffic or other pedestrians. Option D. Approach the individual calmly, speak in a non-confrontational tone, and attempt to assess their well-being and situation. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual calmly, speak in a non-confrontational tone, and attempt to assess their well-being and situation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Cincinnati, Ohio, involving the potential for a citizen to be under the influence of substances while interacting with police. The difficulty lies in balancing the need to ensure public safety and investigate potential offenses with the imperative to treat individuals with respect and avoid unnecessary escalation, especially when the individual's behavior is erratic but not yet overtly criminal. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering both the observed behavior and the potential underlying causes, while adhering to the legal and ethical standards governing police conduct in Ohio. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalation and a measured approach to gathering information. This means approaching the individual calmly, speaking in a clear and non-confrontational manner, and attempting to ascertain their well-being and intentions. The officer should observe the individual's behavior for any signs of distress, disorientation, or immediate threat to themselves or others. If the individual is not posing an immediate danger and is not engaged in criminal activity, the primary focus should be on ensuring their safety and potentially connecting them with resources if they appear to be in need of assistance, such as mental health services or transportation. This approach aligns with the principles of community policing and the Ohio Revised Code's emphasis on lawful and reasonable conduct by law enforcement officers, prioritizing the preservation of life and dignity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately assume criminal intent and demand compliance with aggressive questioning or physical intervention. This fails to consider that erratic behavior can stem from medical emergencies, mental health crises, or simple disorientation, and such an approach risks escalating a non-criminal situation into a confrontation, potentially violating the individual's rights and leading to unnecessary force. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the individual's presence and continue on patrol without any attempt to assess the situation. This neglects the officer's duty to ensure public safety and to investigate potential disturbances or individuals in distress, which could have negative consequences if the individual later poses a danger or requires assistance. A third incorrect approach would be to immediately call for backup and maintain a significant distance, treating the individual as an immediate high-risk threat without further observation. While caution is warranted, an overly cautious approach that avoids direct, calm engagement can be perceived as hostile and may prevent the officer from de-escalating the situation or understanding the individual's needs. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes observation, communication, and de-escalation. This involves 1. Assessing the immediate environment for threats. 2. Observing the individual's behavior and demeanor for signs of danger, distress, or impairment. 3. Initiating calm, clear, and respectful communication to gather information and de-escalate. 4. considering potential underlying causes for the behavior, including medical or mental health issues. 5. Acting within the bounds of Ohio law and departmental policy to ensure safety and address any criminal activity or need for assistance. And 6. Documenting all actions and observations thoroughly. Question 18. System analysis indicates that Cincinnati Police Department, CPD, officers are dispatched to a public park following a report of an individual exhibiting erratic behavior, shouting incoherently and appearing agitated. Upon arrival, officers observe the individual pacing and gesturing wildly, but they do not immediately perceive an overt threat to others. Considering the potential for a mental health crisis, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for the responding CPD officers in Cincinnati, Ohio? Option A. Attempt to verbally engage the individual, assess their mental state, and determine if they pose an immediate threat before considering further action, prioritizing de-escalation and connection to mental health resources if appropriate. Option B. Immediately attempt to physically detain the individual to prevent any potential escalation of their erratic behavior. Option C. Leave the scene without further intervention, assuming the individual is not an immediate danger to the public. Option D. Call for a specialized tactical unit and prepare for a forceful apprehension without attempting initial verbal contact. The correct answer is A. Attempt to verbally engage the individual, assess their mental state, and determine if they pose an immediate threat before considering further action, prioritizing de-escalation and connection to mental health resources if appropriate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Cincinnati, Ohio, involving the potential for a citizen to be experiencing a mental health crisis. The difficulty lies in balancing the need for immediate intervention to ensure public safety and the individual's well-being with the requirement to de-escalate the situation and avoid unnecessary force. Misjudging the situation could lead to harm to the individual, the public, or the officers themselves, and could result in significant legal and ethical repercussions for the Cincinnati Police Department, CPD. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves approaching the situation with a focus on de-escalation and mental health crisis intervention. This means officers should attempt to verbally engage with the individual, assess their mental state, and determine if they pose an immediate threat to themselves or others. If the individual is not an immediate threat, the priority should be to connect them with appropriate mental health services or resources, rather than immediate arrest or forceful apprehension. This approach aligns with CPD's training protocols and the broader ethical imperative to treat individuals experiencing mental health crises with compassion and to utilize the least restrictive means necessary to resolve the situation. Ohio law and CPD policy emphasize the importance of crisis intervention training (CIT) and the use of specialized units or resources when available and appropriate. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately attempt to physically detain the individual without attempting verbal de-escalation or assessing their mental state. This fails to acknowledge the possibility of a mental health crisis and could escalate the situation unnecessarily, leading to potential injury and violating the principle of using the least restrictive means. It also disregards the importance of de-escalation techniques that are a core component of modern policing. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation and leave the individual without offering assistance or attempting to assess their well-being. This would be a dereliction of duty, as officers have a responsibility to investigate potential disturbances and ensure the safety of the public, including those who may be vulnerable due to mental health issues. This approach fails to uphold the CPD's commitment to community service and public safety. A third incorrect approach would be to immediately call for backup and prepare for a forceful apprehension without first attempting to communicate with the individual. While backup is often necessary, initiating a forceful response without attempting to understand the situation or de-escalate can be counterproductive and lead to a more dangerous outcome for all involved. It bypasses crucial steps in responsible crisis management. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation and assessment. This involves 1. Observe and assess. Gather information about the individual's behavior and the environment. 2. Communicate and de-escalate. Attempt to establish verbal contact, listen actively, and use calming techniques. 3. Determine threat level. Evaluate the immediate risk to self or others. 4. Utilize resources. If a mental health crisis is suspected and there is no immediate threat, seek appropriate mental health support or specialized units. 5. Employ least restrictive means. If intervention is necessary, use the minimum force required to ensure safety. Question 19. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential crime scene has been identified in a public park in Cincinnati, Ohio, where a suspicious package has been found discarded near a walking path. Officer Miller arrives on the scene and observes an individual walking away from the general vicinity of the package. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Secure the immediate area around the suspicious package. Observe the individual's direction of travel, and then approach the individual to gather information about what they may have seen or know, administering Miranda rights if the situation warrants detention. Option B. Approach the individual and ask them directly if they discarded the package, without first securing the scene or considering their rights. Option C. Immediately detain the individual walking away from the package and conduct a thorough search of their person and belongings for any connection to the package. Option D. Focus solely on collecting the suspicious package as evidence and disregard the individual walking away, assuming they are unrelated. Correct answer is A. Secure the immediate area around the suspicious package, observe the individual's direction of travel, and then approach the individual to gather information about what they may have seen or know, administering Miranda rights if the situation warrants detention. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Officer Miller to balance the immediate need for information with the established legal and ethical protocols for handling evidence and witness statements. The pressure to quickly resolve a crime can lead to shortcuts that compromise the integrity of the investigation and potentially violate the rights of individuals involved. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are lawful, ethical, and contribute to a sound evidentiary foundation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene, identifying potential witnesses, and then initiating formal interviews in a controlled environment, ensuring Miranda rights are administered if necessary, and documenting all observations and statements meticulously. This approach is correct because it adheres to the fundamental principles of evidence preservation and due process. Specifically, it aligns with the Ohio Revised Code regarding the lawful collection of evidence and the constitutional rights of individuals, ensuring that any statements obtained are admissible in court and that the investigation proceeds without prejudice. This method prioritizes the integrity of the investigation and the rights of all parties. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately questioning the individual found near the discarded item without first securing the scene or considering their potential status as a witness or suspect. This could lead to contamination of potential evidence, the loss of crucial information if the individual leaves, or the inadvertent violation of their rights if they are detained or questioned in a manner that constitutes an arrest without proper procedure. Another incorrect approach is to collect the discarded item as evidence without documenting its exact location and condition at the time of discovery, and without considering the potential presence of witnesses who may have observed its disposal. This failure to meticulously document the chain of custody and the context of the evidence can render it inadmissible in court. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on the initial observation of the discarded item and make an assumption about its owner or purpose without further investigation or corroboration. This can lead to a premature conclusion, potentially overlooking other individuals who may have been involved or misinterpreting the significance of the item. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach that begins with scene assessment and preservation. This includes identifying and securing potential evidence, noting its location and condition, and then identifying and interviewing witnesses or potential suspects. All interactions and observations must be thoroughly documented. If an individual is to be detained or questioned in a manner that suggests they are not free to leave, Miranda warnings must be administered in accordance with Ohio law. This methodical process ensures that investigations are conducted lawfully, ethically, and effectively, producing reliable evidence for judicial proceedings. Question 20. Cost-benefit analysis shows that the Cincinnati Police Department, CPD, has a budget of $500,000 for new body-worn cameras. Option A offers cameras with a 5-year warranty, an estimated annual maintenance cost of $15 per camera, and a per-camera purchase price of $600. Option B offers cameras with a 2-year warranty, an estimated annual maintenance cost of $25 per camera, and a per-camera purchase price of $550. Option C offers cameras with a 3-year warranty, an estimated annual maintenance cost of $20 per camera, and a per-camera purchase price of $580. If the CPD plans to purchase 500 cameras, which option represents the most cost-effective solution over a 5-year period, considering both purchase price and maintenance costs? Option A. Option A, as the total 5-year cost per camera is $700. Option B. Option C, as the total 5-year cost per camera is $680. Option C. Option B, as the total 5-year cost per camera is $650. Option D. The CPD should not purchase any cameras, as the budget is insufficient for long-term cost-effectiveness. The correct answer is A. Option A, as the total 5-year cost per camera is $700. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement agencies: resource allocation under budgetary constraints. The Cincinnati Police Department, CPD, must balance the need for effective crime prevention and response with the financial realities of its operating budget. The decision of how to allocate funds for new equipment directly impacts officer safety, operational efficiency, and the department's ability to serve the community. A purely cost-driven decision, without considering the operational benefits and long-term implications, could lead to suboptimal outcomes, potentially compromising public safety or officer well-being. Correct approach analysis. The most professionally sound approach involves a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis that quantifies not only the initial purchase price, but also the projected operational savings, maintenance costs, training expenses, and the quantifiable benefits of improved officer safety and response times. This approach aligns with principles of fiscal responsibility and effective public service management, which are implicitly expected of any public agency. By calculating the return on investment (ROI) for each option, the CPD can make an informed decision that maximizes the value derived from taxpayer funds while enhancing its operational capabilities. For instance, a slightly more expensive body camera system with a longer lifespan and lower data storage costs per unit might prove more cost-effective over 5 years than a cheaper initial purchase with higher ongoing expenses. The formula for ROI, often expressed as \text ROI equals \frac text net profit text cost of investment times 100 %. Or in this context, a modified version considering benefits would be crucial. Incorrect approach is analysis. Prioritizing the lowest upfront cost without considering long-term expenses or operational benefits is a failure of fiscal prudence and strategic planning. This approach could lead to the acquisition of equipment that is less durable, requires more frequent repairs, or lacks essential features, ultimately costing more in the long run and potentially compromising officer effectiveness. It neglects the principle of achieving the best value for public money. Focusing solely on the most advanced technology, regardless of its necessity or cost-effectiveness, is also professionally unsound. While innovation is important, acquiring features that are not essential for the CPD's specific operational needs or that significantly exceed the budget without a clear justification for the added benefit represents a misallocation of resources. This approach can lead to unnecessary expenditure and potential training burden for officers on features they may not utilize. Selecting equipment based on vendor relationships or perceived prestige rather than objective performance metrics and cost-benefit analysis is a significant ethical and professional failing. Such decisions can be influenced by bias, leading to suboptimal choices that do not serve the best interests of the department or the public. It undermines the integrity of the procurement process and can result in acquiring equipment that is not fit for purpose. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement, like those in any public service, must employ a structured decision-making process when faced with resource allocation choices. This process should begin with clearly defining the problem and the objectives, e.g., enhancing officer safety, improving evidence collection. Next, all viable options should be identified and thoroughly researched. A quantitative analysis, such as a cost-benefit analysis, should be performed for each option, considering both tangible and intangible factors. This analysis should be followed by a qualitative assessment of factors that are difficult to quantify but are nonetheless important, e.g., ease of use, vendor support. Finally, the decision should be made based on the comprehensive evaluation, ensuring transparency and accountability in the process.